Hi, my name is Blair, and in this tutorial I'll show you how to create a pop-up for a content page. The agenda for this tutorial then is we'll take a look at a few sample pop-ups, we'll take a look at the Umbraco architecture behind those pop-ups, and we'll look at some of the code that we use to implement the pop-ups. Here's a content page with three sample pop-ups configured. So we take a look at the first one. I can click me here to open it. We'll see that the basic pop-up has a dark overlay. The pop-up itself, you can control that what HTML you have, but in the CMS I've configured a title and then some body. The pop-up has default close icon, but you can configure it, as you'll see in other pop-ups, with buttons to close it if so desired. And the second pop-up will show us one that you can configure buttons at the bottom. This one's just got a close button that does the same thing as the X button. Some users might prefer to have a close button, but both work just as well. And then third example is a kind of real world example how you would use it in your content. Typically have some text and then an info box explaining. So here we can see we have a title, we have some text. This one's not configured with any buttons at the bottom. It's got the X button, and also, just to demonstrate, we could click on the underlay to close the dialogue, which is what I find most convenient. Some pop-ups force you to navigate to an X button, which is time consuming and not necessary. Okay, here's the pop-up content page that's configured with three pop-ups. What we find is that pop-up will have a text section containing the trigger for the pop-up, which we see here is actually me, and then we'll have a section that defines the pop-up itself. So if we take a look at the text section, we can see that we identify the trigger for the pop-up by adding a class. We can call the class anything. We just need to tie this with the configuration in the pop-up section. So that's pop-up trigger. So if we look at the pop-up section, then we can see here that the trigger is identified. It's a CSS selector, so pop-up trigger with a dot beforehand, and then we define the pop-up itself, give it a title, and then give it some text, which is any HTML, and then we can configure a dismiss button if we want, close, dismiss, OK, cancel, or none. And that's really the configuration for the pop-up. So that one is this. Next one, we can see that that's the pop-up with the close button. And again, if we look at the HTML, it's pop-up trigger 2, and I've got two triggers for the pop-up here, one me and one for the info icon. And then if we take a look at the second pop-up, we can see it's pop-up trigger 2, and we've configured a close button on that. That corresponds with being triggered by me. And then if we take a look at the second pop-up, we can see it's pop-up trigger 2, and we've configured a close button on that. That corresponds with being triggered by me. And that corresponds with being triggered by me. or info, and having a close dismiss button. And the real world example is the third pop-up. If we take a look at that on the info icon, we just have a pop-up trigger 3. And we can see that that's identified by the trigger. We give that the title and we give it some text and no button configured, and that gives us the third pop-up. Here's the Popup plugin. It's a jQuery pop-up called JB Popup that essentially identifies the pop-up and passes it to the plugin. So JB Popup, this is the first one I've switched to using class rather than function. So what we can see is per my other plugins, they have a structure that initializes the plugin, creates some methods, and then binds the events that make use of those methods. And the plugin just calls each of those: initialize, create methods, and bind events, and that's it. So we take a look at the initialize. First just add a helper function to give me a C# format method. Defaults for the plugin then. So there is no trigger defined by default. That's what needs to be supplied, and as we saw in the content, we set up the trigger in code by giving it a class name that the plugin is configured to tap into. The pop-up, as we saw, the jQuery passes this in. CSS config. This is just to make sure the pop-up is hidden whenever it's first put into the content page. We identify the overlay. Here's one I've configured in the CSS, just to give us that dark background, but I've tried to make things as configurable as possible. Again, when you define your pop-up HTML, you can put close triggers wherever you want, so the plugin will look for classes with close or cancel and latch onto them as dismissals. If there is no close trigger, and then you can use the plugin's default close trigger, which is the X icon. I actually use a Font Awesome plus icon and rotate it just to give it an X. I don't know why there isn't an FA close. There you go. Default overlay. This is the one I use, but again, someone else could use a different one. And dismiss button identifies whether the user wants to have a dismissal button, and if so, we'll supply a text string for the name that goes on that button. If a button's required, I'll use the button container configured like this, with the text of the button inserted, but you can use your own. So we just identify the trigger, we identify the pop-up, and identify the overlay. If there's no overlay on the page, we add the default one, and Also, if there's no close trigger, then we'll add the default X icon. And if a dismiss button has been requested, we'll append that. So methods of the plugin: set pop-up position. What we do is we center the pop-up on screen, but we calculate that width, and this accommodates the browser resizing. Each time it resizes, it will calculate the width for the pop-up and set it accordingly. Then we have a couple of methods, one to show the pop-up, and when we show the pop-up we actually show the overlay first, fade that in, and then we fade in the pop-up on top of it. And when we hide the pop-up, we'll do the reverse. We'll hide the pop-up, we stop any animation in case the user wants to close it before it's finished opening. So we close the pop-up and we hide the overlay as well. Binding events. So what we do with we find the trigger, and whenever that gets clicked, then we'll call the show event to display the pop-up. We pass the context of this into the event so that we can pick up the pop-up by the event parameters and tap into the show method. For the overlay, we'll attach a click event that will hide the pop-up. So this is the main reason I developed this, just for the convenience of clicking away in dialog by not having to search for the close button. Just click on the overlay or underlay, and the pop-up, all the close triggers on it, we'll find those and then we'll hide the pop-up. Window resize, we recalc the pop-up position, and that completes the plugin. If we look at the section in the CMS, I've configured the pop-up section as a doc type, and it pulls in the pop-up plugins. So we just pull out the trigger, we check if there's a dismiss button. If there is, then we'll add it onto the options, and we identify the ID of the actual pop-up itself, which we put in this section. So here we have the pop-up has the class GB pop-up to make sure it's hidden. It has the ID based on the node, content node, which we build up here. We pull out the title that users entered and the HTML text of the vendor, so that's title and text, and then we just invoke the plugin and pass in those options, and that's it. The less is just how we configure the pop-up. So as I said, the overlay and the pop-up are initially hidden, but then we change that when the pop-up is shown. It's fixed relative to the browser, and we want to make sure that it appears on top of any content. So that's the overlay, and then the pop-up itself will appear on top of the overlay. We give it a default width of 580 pixels, but that'll shorten if the browser's narrowed less than that. I'm going to give it a minimum height just to give it a reasonable look. The overlay will occupy the full width and height. We give it a degree of transparency. And the default close, as I said, we rotate the plus sign to give it an X. And pointer whenever we hover over it. And we've got a title and a text besides that, and that's that.